Please, what's your emergency?
And I think I found a dead body.
Sorry?
Dead body.
There's a dead body?
Yeah.
So someone slipped in and drowned, or actually, is this a murder scene?
It looks like it's a teenager, really.
Looks like a teenager.
Why was a young man's life taken in such a tragic way?
There's something dark going on underneath that relationship.
It's about status, power, control.
It's reckless and it's intentional.
We have a 2-hour time period when we don't know where they've been and what they've done. Is there a killer on the loose? We need the evidence to tell us.
A dog walker going along the banks of the River Hull spotted something which looked to them suspicious.
Can you tell if it's a male or a female?
Male, I think.
When they took a closer look, they could see that it was the body just on the edge of the riverbank.
And you say you've actually touched him and there was no response?
I took him in my foot.
It's obviously a young person, probably aged between 16 and 20.
There's no chance that he's asleep or anything. There's no breathing or anything like that you could see it.
No.
Police cordon off a stretch of the River Hull. It's not yet clear how the teenager died.
The body isn't fully submerged, the head is slightly, but the majority of the body is just lying on the riverbank.
Supposed to a passerby, it may have appeared as if this is somebody who had got into difficulties in the river itself.
No obvious signs of murder. No visible signs of a struggle or stab wounds or anything like that. A whole number of options come to mind, but you must go with what the forensics tell you.
You always have to treat any scene where a body is as a suspicious scene. Is the death natural causes? Is it suicide? Has someone fallen in the river? Have they been drunk and fallen in? Or is it murder? The role of a crime scene manager is to rule out the different hypotheses.
A pathologist is called to the scene.
The first thing to do is identify the body. Often, once you know the identity of a body, the rest of it falls into place.
CSIs search the cordon, but find no personal belongings.
The main way that we can identify someone quite quickly is on fingerprints. If someone's known on police record, you only need a small bit of fingerprint to be able to identify who they are.
The teenager's fingerprints are sent off to be run through the database, while police check missing persons reports and call on nearby homes.
There's quite a large housing estate on one side of the riverbank. Your job, as well as to investigate and bring closure for the loved ones, is also to, if you like, reassure the public.
Just hours after finding the man, the fingerprints hit a match. He's identified as Connor Lyons.
He was 17, but probably looked about 15 or 16. He's extremely a popular young lad.
He was a local boy, a local teenager, really at the cusp of adulthood. He was just about to make those big moves, leaving school, starting work. We knew that there would have been a lot of interest in the area from that community because it wasn't really clear how he was there, why he was there.
He's on the fingerprint register, so he's got a criminal conviction. But the criminal conviction is for low-level social crime, so nothing earth-shattering. He's not a career criminal. He's just a young lad that's probably lost his way a little bit. He'd turned a bit of a corner and was more focused on what he wanted to do. And he was going to go to college and learn to be a plumber. So he had a career in mind, a well-paid career as well. He was kind-hearted and no one had a bad word to say for him.
Connor lives less than a mile from the crime scene.
The police had the awful job of going round to his parents to confirm that they found his body.
It's very difficult to tell the family that their loved one has died in suspicious circumstances, and you haven't come to any conclusions yet, because they want answers. They want to make sense of it.
Connor's family tell them he went out around 8 p.m. He was riding his bike with his loyal companion Callie by his side.
From speaking to family, Connor had a dog called Callie, and his dog literally was by his side day and night, and he had a lead for him. The time that Connor went missing, the dog also goes missing.
Callie was found alone later that night, hungry and nervous, helping narrow down Connor's final movements. CSIs at the river look for clues as to what has happened.
The victim, Connor, was missing a gold bracelet, bike, and his mobile phone.
There was a gold bracelet that had been bought for him as a present. It did raise a suspicion as to whether or not there had been some form of foul play.
The fact that these are missing then tends to point towards, was this a robbery?
Amid the uncertainty, speculation is rife.
This would have caused a ripple effect within the community. Hearing the news of a young person known well within the community, knowing the family within the community, people start talking and people start coming up with their own theories and their own conclusions to what was going on in that situation.
There'll be all sorts of stuff on the rumour mill. It's a two-way street. The public want to know what's going on, but equally the police want to harvest any information or intelligence there is that might help their inquiry. There was a rumour circulating. He was talking about suicidal tendencies.
There was the seed of potentially Connor got into problems with others, potentially involving drugs, and that he may have been harmed by those people.
With rumours swirling, the team urgently needs to determine how Connor died.
If this is murder, how can the crime scene tell us the story as to what has happened?
Is it a suicide? Is it foul play? Lots of question marks at the moment, and no real answers.
The body of 17-year-old aspiring plumber Connor Lyons has been found on the banks of the River Hull.
The reaction in the newsroom was obviously one of sympathy for the people involved, but also you switch into a professional gear. It's a big news story with a lot of interest in the area because he formed part of the community where, sadly, he died. Questions being asked were, how on earth did it happen? Why did it happen? And really, is it a safe place for my children to go?
But after finding no obvious injuries, forensics still need to determine how he died and if anyone else is involved.
Until you've had a post-mortem examination on the body, you don't really know what you're looking for. You have to set your parameters quite large. There's a lot of mud around. I would expect that the suspects would be covered in mud, or at least have mud on their lower clothing, their footwear, and their bottoms of their trousers. Soil samples are a really important sample to take from these kind of crime scenes because they may link back to an offender. If you find a pair of shoes or clothing with soil on them, you can match that. Soil can be really distinctive to a particular area. The soil samples will be taken from multiple areas around where the body's been found. You're not looking at a really deep soil sample because if there's any transfer of material, it's going to be the top surface.
They also focus on finding Connor's missing phone, bike, and a gold bracelet he was wearing.
There is a possible motive of robbery.
If someone's been found on a riverbank, there may be items that have been thrown into the river close to where that body is, or items might have fallen off the body.
Police divers enter the water.
Searching a riverbed in the UK is very difficult. It's a long, laborious process. The visibility in the water is virtually zero, and so the police divers would be doing a fingertip search. It's a scientific process to try and determine how wide an area they need to search. Depending on how fast the river's flowing and how strong the current is, that could wash away evidence. It could move evidence.
With rumours flying around about how Connor died, they need to know more about his life.
Straight away, the police have got to do an intelligence search to find out what they know about Connor and who his known associates are, because that may well point to foul play. There's clearly evidence that Connor was a very popular, nice young man.
Connor moved to the Bransholme estate in Hull 3 years ago.
The Bransholme estate sits on the outskirts of the city to the east of the River Hull. The estate was built in the 1960s and 70s, and at the time it was described as the biggest council estate in Europe. But despite its size, I would say it still retains a village feel. It had its own shops, had its own pubs, had its own churches, schools, and there is a strong community identity. It tends to be very much a case of everybody really knows everybody else. Connor was a very well-known character on the Bransholme estate. We quickly became aware of his popularity through social media.
Shocked by his death, Connor's devastated friends post tributes to him on social media, and flowers from the community build at the crime scene.
The support Connor's family gave to each other and from the community, there was a lot of sympathy as well, losing somebody so young.
He turned his life around from having difficulties. He'd had a nasty accident a couple of years beforehand.
Police discover that Connor was badly injured in a serious bike accident.
Somebody's going through a traumatic experience. Their vulnerabilities are going to be heightened. That accident had a significant impact on his body and would have had a significant impact on his mental health. And through that traumatic experience, we've seen a decline and a change in Connor's behaviour. And what we start to see is a trajectory of change, getting involved in things that they shouldn't.
They've shut down all the youth clubs and there's nothing for kids to do.
Boredom amongst young people is an interesting factor. We're talking about economic climates and we're talking about lack of opportunity. We're talking about lack of resources that unfortunately sometimes get them caught up in the law.
Connor's family tell police he's been putting the past behind him, but in recent weeks, he hadn't been his usual self.
Connor was distracted. That could indicate he was having some difficulties with friends. It's important to speak to their peer group to find out what they were interested in, who their friends were, because normally if someone's murdered, they will be known to the perpetrator.
To build up a picture of who was in Connor's life, detectives take statements from his associates and study their social media, and quickly have a lead.
There was a social media post in relation to the sale of Connor's missing bike.
Connor had a quite distinctive bicycle that he took everywhere. Everyone knew what it looked like.
Digital experts trace the seller.
Comes back to a guy called Cole Jarvis.
Jarvis lived on the Bransholme estate in the same area as Connor. They were, in fact, living quite close to each other.
He was somebody who had a group of friends, many of whom were significantly younger than he was. Connor was one of them.
Police learn Connor met 21-year-old Jarvis around 6 months ago, after approaching him for help fixing up a dirt bike.
Young people make relationships quite quickly. Both of them like bikes, both of them like motorcycles, and it's those things that may have that initial connection.
They're members of the same peer group, and it would seem that the common interest they had is playing video games, lamping, which is hunting for things like rabbits and stuff like that.
Digital forensic investigators find Jarvis has made several attempts to sell Connor's bike on social media.
On the face of it, it's evidence of suspicion of theft. So let's get him in, hear what he has to say. And it's very important in a murder investigation, you get a story from a suspect as quickly as you can, so that you can either corroborate it or otherwise.
Cole Jarvis is arrested on suspicion of theft.
He said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't got the bike. And says, I don't know Connor that well at all. He's, moved in beside me and we're acquaintances more than friends. It's when the police start delving into the peer group and what they've witnessed and what they've heard from Jarvis, they realise that Jarvis is telling a pack of lies.
With Jarvis in custody, an associate gives a statement. He saw Jarvis after 11 p.m. wearing wet and muddy trainers, riding Connor's distinctive bike.
One of the peer group says that he had squelchy shoes, which indicates he's been near water. His explanation for that was, because I'd taken the dog out for a walk. What is damning for him, he was seen riding that bike on the evening.
When confronted, Jarvis's account takes a U-turn.
He then changes his tune, and he tries to change the narrative in another direction.
Now Jarvis tells police he and Connor are in fact friends, and he did have his bike because Connor sold it to him.
Of all the items that went missing, this was in many senses, one of the more important ones, if not the most important, because it was a bike that was important to Connor, and would have been unlikely that he would have been trying to sell it.
What we see with Jarvis, he's continued to go out into the community and try and sell the bike. It suggests that he may be involved.
Why else did he sell the bike? Because he knows Connor won't need it because he's dead. That's my conjecture.
Detectives asked Jarvis if he went to the riverbank on the night of the 18th of January. He denies ever being there.
Now, it's not an offence to tell a lie to a police officer, but what it is good circumstantial evidence if you can prove that that suspect has lied to you, that his account or his narrative can't be relied upon because all these witnesses say this is actually what happened.
Intelligence officers scrutinising the rumours spreading across the estate about how Connor died have found further evidence that Jarvis has been lying.
When the police start questioning the peer group, they suddenly starts to dawn on them that the one starting these rumours is actually Jarvis. And why is he doing it?
One involved the suggestion that he had been with Connor much earlier in the evening, when Connor had described wanting to hurt or kill himself. He also, to another friend, raised the possibility of Connor being looked for by people involved with drugs. There wasn't one clear picture.
None of which was true, of course. He's sowing a seed of disinformation, if you like, to go along with his narrative.
And in a sense, that implicated his role in this.
We're starting to get a bit more of a picture about a possible suspect, or certainly a person of interest. Doesn't say he's a murderer, but he's got questions to answer.
Needing to know more about Jarvis, detectives interrogate his digital footprint. He claims to have lost his phone, so they request his records from the network. Meanwhile, forensic search teams have recovered Connor's bike from inside a relative's shed.
The problem with a bike is that it's free for other people to touch and handle. Jarvis was actually known to the victim. He had legitimate access to the bike, so finding their DNA and fingerprints on there isn't really going to take the case that much further forward.
The team still needs forensics to tell them what happened to Connor on the riverbank.
You have to prove the cause of death, and the only person that can say that person died as a direct result of that action is a pathologist. They're the forensic experts.
The day after Connor was found, the results are in.
The cause of death wasn't straightforward. The initial indication was that Connor had died by drowning, which remained the case. That is how he died. But as the post-mortem was carried out and took place, there were other findings as well. There was damage and bruising around the neck area, which indicated a ligature may have been used. He also had petechiae, so that's the little blood vessels around your eyes and inside your lip, which can rupture on pressure being applied to the neck. Those injuries were not immediately apparent on the surface.
One possible scenario that the pathologist came up with was that Connor had been strangled and then left to drown. So he'd been left in the water knowing that he was going to drown because he'd been rendered unconscious. The second possible scenario was that he'd been strangled and then held forcibly under the water to drown.
Whichever way, The strangulation was an integral part to his death.
Were they callous enough just to leave him there to die? It matters not. In law, there is no difference.
Humberside police officially have a murder investigation on their hands.
Now this is a murder inquiry. There's a massive shift in the investigation. What was used to strangle Connor? It's really important to try and find the ligature. Being able to find that vital piece of evidence may lead them to the offenders because they might well have their DNA as well as the victim's DNA.
The pathologist suggests that Connor may have been strangled with a rope over his waterproof jacket, which would explain why there are no visible markings on his skin.
A piece of rope had some significance because one of the witnesses had described Jarvis as making a reference to a piece of blue rope in the context of using it to tie people up.
Maybe Jarvis showing people the blue rope is just him showing what he's prepared to do.
This time, when police ask Jarvis about Connor's death, he answers no comment.
It can be tremendously frustrating because they can't really get to the root of the murder. There's lots of circumstantial evidence pointing to him as a person of interest, and he can't be eliminated, but he's implicated, but there is insufficient evidence to charge him with murder.
The team needs more time to find a forensic link between him and the crime scene.
There's a sense of urgency now. They haven't got an open-ended clock. What you have to do is prove the lies and prove the truth.
Police in Humberside are running out of time to question 21-year-old Cole Jarvis about the murder of his friend, 17-year-old Connor Lyons. A post-mortem has found that Connor was strangled before drowning in the River Hull, and circumstantial evidence points to Jarvis as his killer. But the team still needs a direct forensic link between him and the crime scene.
There's loads of circumstantial evidence, but there's nothing to put both of them at the murder scene.
There's very little evidence at that crime scene, so you have to then look at further types of evidence, so digital evidence, CCTV evidence.
The clock is ticking all this time. You've got to be resilient. You've got to keep pushing away.
Hull Magistrates Court grants the team a 36-hour custody extension. Using CCTV and phone data, police track Connor and Jarvis's movements. The pathologist determines Connor lay dead for several hours before he was discovered.
Time of death is crucial for forming the parameters of harvesting CCTV. So instead of doing a wide sweep, almost a fishing expedition, you've got time parameters that you can go to. Unfortunately, there's no CCTV of the actual murder scene, but you can look at when was the suspect and the victim last seen, were they seen together?
After leaving home, Connor meets up with Jarvis and they're seen out on the estate together. At around 8 p.m, CCTV captures two figures walking towards the crime scene.
The closest point to the river from the estate is only a 5-10 minute walk.
You were able to see a dog there which matched by description Connor's dog. It was not possible from the footage itself to necessarily make very clear identifications. A lot of time was spent analysing different pieces of CCTV footage to piece them together. You were able to see parts of the clothing which police were able to match up with some of the clothing that we know either Connor or Jarvis were wearing on the night.
The figure that was identified was wearing like a green Parker-style jacket, but they had very distinctive trainers, which covered reflective area that the CCTV picks up.
When you put them all together, you can start to say, well, this must be Connor, this must be Jarvis.
In this case, it indicates Connor would have gone there of his own volition, and we know that Connor and some of his friends were into lamping, which is basically hunting wildlife at night. And it may well be perfectly legitimate for him to go to that area by the riverbank late at night to do some lamping. And I suggest that's how he was lured to that area.
Officers continue to track the men on CCTV. Meanwhile, digital experts analysing phone data have discovered that Jarvis has been telling more lies about his friendship with Connor.
The data indicated that there were quite abusive text messages, that the relationship was deteriorating.
The relationship between Connor and Jarvis was a volatile one, which was capable of erupting into violence at times. The overall picture we had was that Jarvis appeared on the evidence to be the dominant person within that dynamic.
Jarvis is slightly older than the peer group he's mixing with, and I think people can draw the conclusion that he was a bit of a bully, that he tried to coerce younger kids into doing what he wanted them to do. My conjecture would be that he mixed with younger boys because he liked to be in control. He liked to be the boss, if you like.
He's going to have a little bit more knowledge as opposed to those young people that he may engage in. So it's almost like currency. Status, hierarchy, and control play a role in friendships. In every group and in every friendship group, there is going to be individuals that want to take lead, that want to be drivers. Jarvis being the leader of the pack in that type of environment, it would have definitely stroked his ego. Where Connor was slightly different is that he was an individual with a strong personality, and we know of loads of incidents where they clashed.
The team needs to find out if one of their fights turned fatal, and why. Shortly after 8 p.m, the figures are captured again on CCTV crossing John Newton Way, heading towards the River Hull, before they disappear from view. At 10:20 p.m, only one figure reappears.
Connor is not in that CCTV. There's a gap of 2 hours, which is consistent with what the pathologist says at the time of death. You can conclude that Connor's either dead or dying by the side of the river.
Detectives are convinced the grainy figure on CCTV is Jarvis fleeing the crime scene. He's seen heading back towards his home, but they still need further proof it's him. With the custody clock running out, a new key witness comes forward with incriminating evidence, just in time.
There was an eyewitness who was driving along Thomas Clarkson Way on his way to work at around 10:20. He's driven past. He's seen this person with a dog.
The area off Thomas Clarkson Way towards the river is pretty much open countryside, woodland, if you like. No CCTV, no street lighting. Large areas that isn't covered by any lighting at all. It's quite a desolate spot. There isn't any reason, good reason perhaps, to be in that area on foot at that time of night.
He was able to give a description of a man wearing broadly similar clothing which was worn by Jarvis that night and was with a dog that matched the description of Connor's. The eyewitness was able to pick out Jarvis on an identification parade, albeit he could not be sure. It fits the next sighting of the defendant on CCTV heading back towards his home area, only minutes from that sighting. It was one of the most remarkable pieces of evidence in the sense of I've no idea how he remembered seeing this person and the timing. It was quite extraordinary.
Investigators cross-reference the CCTV and eyewitness testimony with Jarvis's phone data.
At various stages on the CCTV footage, you could see that the person was using the telephone.
When they match the data, he's trying to sell the bicycle on the mobile phone. Now, that's very callous.
Humberside police arrest Cole Jarvis on suspicion of Connor's murder. A warrant is secured to search his home and related addresses.
There's certain things in an investigation that you would want to look for. In this case, you'd be definitely looking for any muddy clothing, any muddy shoes, because potentially you can tie that muddy clothing up to the riverbank where Connor was last seen alive. If an item is really muddy or really wet, the DNA may be inhibited because of the contamination. The bacteria may be from the mud and also from the wet. Say if it's been in water, a river or something. These shoes are quite heavily mud stained. They've got quite a lot of soil on the tops, on the uppers and the lowers of them. The forensic scientists might be able to ascertain where the soil has come from, and if they've got a soil sample from a site, they can compare the two and see if this soil from the shoe has been at the scene.
The trainers and mud samples collected at the crime scene are sent for comparison to soil expert Dr. Rosie Everett.
My role on the case is to understand whether there is any forensic ecological evidence that can help the police understand whether the suspect has been at the scene. The key pieces of evidence that I examined was a pair of trainers. They were caked in mud right up to the laces. We want to understand what is that mud, where has it come from, and whether there's anything microscopic that we can use to link the scene and the suspect.
Back at HQ, the intelligence team are still trying to understand what triggered Jarvis to kill Connor.
When you looked at the relationship between them and looked at the communications between them, what it did show is a volatile relationship where they were capable of issuing threats to each other, at times fighting like cat and dog.
The team discovers that 3 months ago, tensions boiled over after Jarvis sold a bike belonging to Connor without his permission.
Connor confronts him and says, "Where's my money for my bike?" And Jarvis refuses to give it to him. So at that stage, I would suggest it's when it really starts to turn toxic, because he's basically stealing from Connor for whatever reason.
There were messages in which it appeared Connor was making quite significant threats towards Jarvis. What was also apparent is that when you look at the messages, Jarvis had no fear of Connor. And you had messages from Jarvis to Connor saying, "Carry on testing me, you'll see what would happen."
There were text messages where Jarvis says that Connor is a cheeky, gobby little rat.
I think that maybe his power was challenged. I think that he felt that control he was losing because he's seen in Connor that he's an individual that didn't want to toe the line anymore. But when you have another individual that then stands out from the pack and says, "No, I don't like this. No, I'm not going to follow your instruction," and actually meet you at some point with conflict, it changes the whole dynamic. And then when it changes that whole dynamic, then someone like Jarvis now has to demonstrate authority, now has to demonstrate control.
A witness tells police Jarvis showed them a video of him whacking Connor on the leg with a boat paddle, causing Connor to cry while he laughed.
Jarvis was older and he was more well-developed. There would also be a physical imbalance.
There is evidence that he's stolen from Connor in the past. There is evidence of Jarvis's propensity to use violence and to be forceful in forcing Connor to do what he wanted him to do. If you put it all together, it's starting to show Jarvis's propensity for violence, and the violence is against Connor, who's younger and weaker. It shows some intent.
With the theft of Connor's bike the possible motive, searchers at Jarvis's home move into the garden.
Clearly, you're looking for a murder weapon.
A piece of blue rope was recovered, secreted or hidden in a garden area.
Intelligence has revealed that the offender's been boasting about using a rope to injure somebody. Is this the same rope? have have to kind of put your mind in the mindset of the person doing the attack and think, if I was going to strangle someone with a rope, how would I do it? And therefore, that makes it easier for us to then target specific areas on an item for DNA transfer. The ends of the rope might have the offender's DNA on, and then the center of the rope might have the victim's DNA on. The trouble with this is it's got mud on it, and also it's been wet, so it might inhibit any DNA. So you need to try and avoid the areas of mud, which on something like this is quite difficult. Really get the swab into the nooks and crannies of the rope.
DNA samples from the rope are sent for profiling.
That rope was found to have the DNA of both Connor and Jarvis on, but in locations which would have been consistent with it being held as a ligature and potentially used on Connor.
A rope really is intimate, it's really close, and you would have seen and heard every emotion that would have came with it. So that level of violence really stands out.
That is evidence, good forensic evidence. If there's a rational or lawful explanation for that, don't you think he should have given it? Quite damning, I would say. And it's becoming quite a compelling case for the prosecution.
Cole Jarvis is charged with Connor's murder.
But it doesn't stop there. The police, up to the day of the trial, are still investigating and still asking questions, because he could come up with a cock and bull story saying, well, I've touched the rope, and so has Connor, because we're friends.
With Jarvis changing his story at every turn, police can't afford to leave a jury in any doubt. They still need to forensically link him to the crime scene.
If we don't get that crucial evidence at that scene, we potentially might lose the case at court. The initial thoughts are there's not much at that crime scene.
But after examining Jarvis's trainers, Dr. Rosie Everett has made a breakthrough.
My particular field is an area called diatoms, microscopic single-celled algae. So nothing you can see with the naked eye, but a piece of evidence that forms in water and soils. The suspect was very clear that they'd never been to that part of the River Hull. Actually, this evidence proves that they have.
It was a light bulb moment in the course of the investigation.
"21-year-old Cole Jarvis has been charged with murder. A rope recovered from his garden has returned a DNA match to 17-year-old Connor Lyons, consistent with the pathologist's findings that he was strangled before drowning in the River Hull. And now, microscopic forensic evidence has tied him to the crime scene.
Part of the reason that diatoms have become such an interest as a forensic evidence type is that if they come in contact with clothing, they get into the fibers and they lodge themselves between your fibers. And it's the same with footwear as well. We can look at them down the microscope to identify them to species level based on their shape, based on their size, and based on the features that they have as part of their structure.
Diatoms are unique to particular habitats.
So there are diatoms that are specific to the sea, there are diatoms that are specific to different river types, and there are different diatoms that grow within soils. So we can use that information to build a picture of where they've come from. The River Hull is a really interesting environment from a diatom perspective. It's a big estuary system. So the fresh water runs into the Humber estuary, which then obviously runs out into the North Sea. And it's a huge tidal system. And it means that you have quite a distinct diatom population from all three of those environments. What we can do, if an item of clothing or footwear has those diatoms on them, then we can try and make a link between, for example, a suspect and a scene.
Samples from Jarvis's trainers are compared to mud and water from the crime scene.
So when you're examining a piece of evidence, we have to be able to demonstrate, if there are diatoms in that evidence, that it's not just a quick contact, that it's across the shoe. In total, there were 6 samples. So 1 from the sole, one from the toe cap, one from the rear of the trainer, and then 3 systematically moving up the laces. Looking at the trainers under the microscope, they were covered in diatoms. This demonstrated that this shoe had been absolutely caked up to the laces in wet mud and had come in contact with all of these different diatom populations. And these diatoms matched exactly to the scene.
It's crucial because it directly points to Jarvis being at the murder scene, i.e. on the riverbank where Connor's body was found. It actually links him, the first bit of evidence actually links him physically to that riverbank.
8 months on from Connor's murder, Cole Jarvis's trial begins.
The atmosphere in any case where somebody has died is always tense and intense. And the whole range of emotions, from anger to frustration to anxiety to worry to fear, floating around the courtroom.
In a close-knit community like Bransholm, it's always very, very sad that a case like this can divide and split friendships.
It does add to the pressure. And it's those emotions that are there we also have to try to shield the jury from, because emotion isn't part of their decision-making.
In court, Jarvis showed a lack of remorse.
He was straight-faced, just stared at the wall, was totally disinterested in the proceedings.
He thought he was going to get away with it.
Jarvis's defense claim he has nothing at all to do with Connor's murder.
This case has got really good, compelling forensic evidence. You've got diatoms that have been found on the shoes and the clothing that was found in the river. You've got Connor's DNA on the rope. And also you've got CCTV that puts the victim with the offender at a certain time. All those 3 bits of compelling forensic evidence corroborate with each other. So you've got evidence that will link to other evidence to create a really compelling picture.
The only people that know what actually happened on the riverbank is Connor, who's dead, and Jarvis, who's made no comment. Now, if he had an explanation, it would have been in his interest to give it, but he never did.
After hearing the evidence for 3 weeks, it takes under 5 hours for the jury to come to a verdict. Jarvis is found guilty.
When the guilty verdict was announced in court, there were gasps from the public gallery. There was also a lot of tears, and emotions were running high. And it spilled out after the court into words, shouts, screams between the 2 sides on the courtroom steps outside.
Jarvis is sentenced to a minimum term of 21 years.
The judge, in his summing up, alludes to the fact that he believed that Jarvis lured Connor to the riverbank, probably saying, let's go lamping, which was popular with them both. He's gone there, and the intention was to rob him of his gold bracelet and his bicycle. But ultimately, we don't know what was in Jarvis's mind because he's never told anybody. He was invited to, but he never did. He never gave evidence in his own defence. If he'd got away with this, I think he would have escalated his offending.
When we think about toxic relationships in any form, people may ask the question, why does a person stay? But oftentimes there may have been elements where they did have, connection. There may have been elements within their relationship where they had a bit of a laugh.
This is very sad. Connor was loved and respected by all. That's, replicated in the number of people that turned out at his funeral. There were hundreds of people there.
Amid COVID restrictions, 300 vehicles drive in convoy in his honour.
The memory of Connor is one that is beautiful, one that is inspirational, one that shows change.
He had plans for the future, and who knows where that have led. Sadly, we'll never know, because his life was taken from him before he could realise his ambitions.